What is networking?
Networking is getting to know people and building relationships where you are not asking for anything. Networking gets us rep for being like a dirty word and people hating it, and it feels transactional. And that's because that's how it's being treated by most people, right?
I've always described a bit like farming. You need to plant seeds, nurture them, water them. But if you haven't been nurturing that field, it's going to be fallow and it's not going to produce anything for you when the season comes that you're going to need support from it.
But I always say, like, if you want to have something to eat, you have to show up to the table.
And I think if you take one thing away from this episode is that hello and welcome to the Open to Work podcast, coming to you start of every week, as usual, bringing you job tips. And we like to bookend your week here at the Open to Work podcast. Every Monday, we drop a great episode, and every Friday, you get one of our newsletters at the opentowrktoolkit.com. So you can get tips straight into your inbox for free every single week alongside this podcast. But with no further ado, I'm going to introduce my amazing guest for this week, Mike Peditto, Director of Recruiting and all-round content creating legend on LinkedIn. If you're on TikTok or on LinkedIn, you probably know this guy if you're on the job search. So Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited. Your listeners may not know this, but I automatically became a huge fan of yours because your fan or your listeners probably know Dan Space and Dan from HR. And he told me once, he told me once how you made him upset by saying I'm your favorite video content creator. And I was like, great, I love Matt then. That's all I need to know. So I'm glad to be here.
Good to know that it was just pure like nepotism rather than like interest in the podcast, like the ethos that we were coming at, which is like really aligned or anything like that.
Yeah, no, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I think you make great podcast, great content. What you say is right. I don't care. You like me, that means you're amazing.
And for what it's worth, if you're like, I don't lean into the TikTok medium basically at all. We create lots of shorts on, from the podcast, but they don't really land on TikTok. It's not our space. But your stuff is very good and it's very enjoyable. And if you do, nice little plug right early. If you are on your phone right now, what's your handle?
It's Realistic Recruiting.
Give Realistic Recruiting a little search, because it's worth a look. And I've known Mike for quite a while through the social worlds, but I've also been on Mike's podcast, and you are the last person of your podcast to come on this podcast as a little trade. So you're the Corporate Pizza Party, and this is our final Open to Work Corporate Pizza Party collab.
Perfect. I assume you start at the bottom of who you like their content and worked your way up to the top, so that all makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, Farah set a very high bar that Dan had already set a very high bar on. So, like Mike, it can only go upwards from here, right?
Perfect.
Alrighty. Well, look, as you do on Corporate Pizza Party and as we do here on the Open to Work podcast, as if you're in an interview, tell me about yourself.
Sure. So I am someone who's been in the recruiting space for, I've been saying a decade, but I've been saying that for too many years. So at this point, somewhere in the double-digit amount of years. And, a brief history for me and sort of how I wound up here is I was recruiting. I was happy. I was in a great job that I loved. I was laid off in late 2022, like a lot of people in the industry were, and found a job. And when I started that new job, I decided to get on TikTok because I was just like, hey, I just job searched and I'm a recruiter and I know this world pretty well. Let me talk about what it was like and give some advice. And it was working pretty well for me. People were into it. And about 6 weeks into the new job, I lost that job. And I was on the job market again for the second time in 3 months. And I made a video saying it. I was like, hey, I just lost another job. So for the 4,000 followers I have right now, you're going to watch me job search and see everything I say put into action. And I basically live streamed a job search. I showed like my resume, me updating the jobs I was applying to, what I was doing. I recorded interviews, like just my end of it, and like would edit them down and paste and post them. And it worked for me. And then all of a sudden, this is what I did. So, I went back to work full time, but continued making content and talking about it and trying to work with hiring teams on doing better. And it's just a spot that I love to be in. And I love talking about how to be better at both getting jobs and hiring people.
How do you think your perspective of work, like being out of the job market and then advocating for job seekers and supporting job seekers, has changed or impacted you as a recruiting leader?
It's interesting because there's been like a wave with this. When I first got back to work, I was all about, what can I do to make this as perfect as possible for candidates? All I cared about was like not letting candidates go through any of the struggles that they're going through. But eventually, sort of reality sets in, and the longer that the job market goes on, right, and we're seeing candidates dip down. You came on our podcast and talked about this. I'm sure you talk about this all the time. Sort of like the effort sometimes by candidates is getting worse in this market. So I've had to strike that balance, right? It went from where I probably started as like your job seeking best friend, and I think there's a lot of people playing that role. And I've
Mhm.
sort of joked that like I've really tried to become like the job seeking like sitcom dad. Right, I'm fun. You know, I love you in the end, but I'm not going to let you get away with some of this stuff, and we're going to talk about it. And that's the balance I've tried to strike. Like we can
Yeah.
make hiring better, but also you and I, job seeker, have to talk about this is how it is.
Yeah, I went on the exact same journey. I remember, and we talked to when I came on Corporate Pizza Party. I was like right at the peak of like my bottom of I was right at like the kind of bottom of my bell curve of like
Mm-hmm.
just being very frustrated with the candidate market. The amount I had my own roles that I was hiring for in my team, and like if you, I could not be the easier person to get in front of if you tried. Like all of the documentation on how to get a job with me is on the internet, and
Mm-hmm.
that so few people read that content, engaged with it anyway. I'm not saying that I'm expecting you to get a job with me, but like if you wanted a leg up, it's surely the easiest leg up you could get. And to see how few people put in that any effort at all, also maybe had like a realization that if you put in any effort, really, you're going above and beyond 90% of people, and that is still
Mm-hmm.
how low the bar is for most job seekers. So I think it has ultimately like changed my perspective of how I think about the job seeker. But I think it's pushed me to do as a recruiting leader now is really articulate our methodology in the recruiting
Yes.
process up front. So like why are we doing certain things? And I think that is really helping unpick. So I did a recruiter role recently where I said, we're not going to look at your CV. We're going to write these 4 job applications, and they're going to be the main driver of whether or not you get forward in this process or not. And that was really intentional. We explained exactly why we were doing that. And some of the people gave us really bad engagement scores for that, and got really
Mm-hmm.
frustrated about it. And that will be on LinkedIn that you'll be able to see in a couple of days. Well, already when this recording goes out. And some people thought it was like innovative and like the absolutely the right way forward. So yeah, you can never please everyone, but it definitely is maybe be more intentional with how we go to market.
Yeah, I mean, our job descriptions when I would write them for Teal was very much we would lay out like a 30, 60, 90 plan. We would lay out the interview process. We would write like here are going to be some of the tough things in the job. Here's what we're going to like and not like. And you see that all the time. Job descriptions will say, we want this and not this. And people will get mad about how picky they're being, whatever. But it's just like, this should be what you want. This should be what more companies are doing is saying, like, hey, if
Yeah.
this doesn't appeal to you, great. Like, then we're not right. We're telling you, and nobody's going to waste time. It's so much more honest than the just like generic job descriptions and then
Yeah.
terrible process you're not ready for.
Exactly. We are so excited to be sponsored by HireGuide. HireGuide is an end-to-end interview decision platform that makes hiring decisions faster, fairer, and twice as predictive of on-the-job employee performance. As a recruiting leader, I've been looking for a tool that can help me run better interviews across my organization at scale to make better hiring decisions. So when I found HireGuide, I thought all my hopes had been answered. They use cutting-edge AI and behavioral science to enable you to operationalize structured interviews and skills-based hiring that can help you find those star candidates. Hiring a dream team is no easy task, but with HireGuide, it can be. So, Mike, super broadly, what is networking?
Networking to me is a long-term investment of building relationships with people, and it can really be that simple. Sometimes networking gets this rep for being like a dirty word and people hating it, and it feels transactional. And that's because that's how it's being treated by most people, right? There's gurus out there selling courses on how to network, and people talking about like, oh yeah, I'm networking, it's not working. But what they really mean is they're just messaging strangers asking for jobs. That's a part of job searching. But networking is getting to know people and building relationships where you are not asking for anything. And there's no real expectation beyond getting to know people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a long term play, and
Yeah.
and that's where people struggle.
Yeah, networking. I've always described a bit like farming. Like you need to plant seeds, nurture
Mm-hmm.
them, water them, harvest, and then like when that time is right, you may be able to harvest them. But if you haven't been nurturing that field, it's going to be fallow and it's not going to produce anything for you when the season comes that you're going to need support from it. And so it's this constant like lifelong investment that you need to be building. And ideally, you want to have fully established. If the worst happens and you do need to go and look for a job, then you can go and ask that network for support. But it's so much easier if they're already on your side and that is already something you've been harvesting and supporting over a long period of time.
Yeah, it's a perfect analogy too, because the thing I always tell people is that if you're just starting to build a network now, if you don't have one, if it's just not a thing you've invested time into, networking is so much more likely to help your next job search
Yeah.
than this one. And it's right, it's the same with farming. Like if you're hungry right now, but you haven't planted any food, right? Like planting food now is going to help you next time you're hungry, the next season,
Mhm.
not on this one. And that's the biggest gap that exists is people just getting laid off and then be like, okay, I'll network my way into a job. And like, it isn't that simple.
Yeah. And so let's like run through like a scenario when that's happened, right? Like you've been laid off. How would you approach building your let's separate these two things out. You've got like a job search network as you've defined, right? Like this is something that's there's a transactional, and then you've got your long-term network. How would
Mhm.
you approach this kind of moment of being laid off and having to build basically both of these at the same time?
Yeah. And it's hard. And I was in this boat. The first time I got laid off, I had no network outside of like people I had worked with and placed or whatever else. I didn't spend time getting to know people and or really engaging on LinkedIn or anywhere. And, so if I'm starting from zero, again, I'm making that understanding that I'm starting from zero and it's not going to get me any fruit for a while. I begin easy. I start targeting and noticing people who I'm interested in or I care about. The examples I always give for myself are if your listeners may not know, people like Amy Miller or Bonnie Dilber. They had huge followings and had been doing all this stuff online before I ever was. And they were people I started reaching out to after I got let off. I was just like, hey, I've been making some content online. I think you're really good at this. I would love to connect and just sort of keep engaging in content. And that's where it started, commenting on their posts. So I think the starting point for most people is just start engaging with people, not asking for anything, introducing yourself, commenting, supporting what they're doing,
Mhm.
and letting that be almost just like the ground floor.
Yeah. So in my head, when I was like, how would I, when I was reading this question and like challenging myself, the first thing that I was like, how can I find communities of people that are already in this space and active? That was like where my head went initially when I was like thinking about answering this question. Like for a TA perspective, there's like three or four like really prominent global communities which have like a strong like group also that's at the heart of it that are often willing to help and have like
Mm-hmm.
already have like a bought-in desire to help you. So I'd almost start like one step before jumping onto LinkedIn and say like, what are the micro groups within your industry that you can try and find that could help accelerate that networking conversation, who are already pre-charged and they're already pre kind of classified as like they know you, they're also part of this community, they also might want to interact with you and they understand that they're bought into a community interaction. And that was quite successful for me when I started. I remember my job search, I went on the hire community one, I went on the talent community, and then I got invited to a couple of others over time, and that they've become like really core parts of my community now. And I think that could be a good starting point for many others.
Yeah, and that is something too. Right, how to do it off of LinkedIn is an important conversation. I have to stress to people, right, you can't ignore LinkedIn. Like if you want to
Yeah,
do all this, it is a big part, but it isn't the only thing.
yeah.
One great example I think is Slack groups.
Mm.
I'm in a
Yeah,
Slack group because it doesn't have to be your community. Now there are TA Slack groups, I'm sure, but even outside your community, I'm in a Slack group. It's a public Slack group. It's called Slack Dads, and I found it years ago, and it was just like a place where dads talk through the day, and there's a million channels in there. There's work and there's dad complaints and whatever else. And I joined the group randomly, and now I've been in for a few years, and a lot of people in that group are close friends of mine, and a lot are in technology. I've never met any of them in person, but we talk about work a lot. I kind of know what I'll do. I've seen them help each other get jobs or support each other for things, and
yeah,
I think a lot of people don't think of stuff like that as
yeah,
networking. They only
for
think, how
sure.
do I get a job?
Yeah, well, I completely agree. I used to coach someone who was really deep in their religious community, and then became like a job search, like kind of not guru, but like they like formed like a job search community within their religious community that was online, and that was a really powerful place for them to get like support and help each other and network and introduce to each other, and they found a job like through this extended network. All like there are so many people out there that want to support you in your job search, and thinking realistically about kind of how to navigate like that and off of LinkedIn, I think is a really nice and safe starting point for lots and lots of people to then get familiar with like how to ask to help for people when it's not necessarily as preloaded.
Yeah. And I try to tell that to people all the time too when it comes to networking is like people get obsessed with the idea of networking with recruiters and with like executives and hiring managers because again you're thinking transaction first.
Mm-hmm.
But anybody can help you get a job,
Yeah,
right? No matter who someone is. Like my best friend is just a software engineer at a company, but I know if I needed a job and his company was hiring, he would think of me and connect me to that job. You can build relationships with anyone, and
yeah,
that strong relationship bond is going to be such a better help in your network than just a random LinkedIn connection to the recruiter at that company.
yeah. And so on LinkedIn, let's focus on that then. So we're saying you recommended there going and finding people who you admire and starting to follow people who you admire on LinkedIn is like your kind of first port of call, and then dropping into comments and stuff like that as well. Potentially adding like productive and productive elements to the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's one of the safest ways, right? You're not putting yourself out there a ton. You're not creating your own content yet, and any of that stuff you'll hear a lot of people talk about. But you're engaging with where people are, right? I
Yeah,
always say like if you want to have something to eat, you have to show up to the table, and like this is the table. This is where people are, and uh, it is amazing what just being a little bit visible on LinkedIn, just commenting on some posts and engaging
yeah,
conversation does for how many people view your profile and notice you and just start to kind of do those things. And again, it's not immediate turnaround to a job, but it's all these little steps that lead up. So
yeah,
that's where I'd start is I'd show myself as someone who engages in meaningful conversation
yeah.
about stuff I care about.
And it's not just like, oh, this is great, or like, yes,
Right.
please send me that thing. It's try and continue the conversation. Also, LinkedIn likes people who continue the conversation, and so will show you more relevant stuff over time. And Dan Space, our friend Dan Space, like gave some great advice, like go and proactively find like the areas or the segments or the types of content that you want, and then like do like a day of just like aggressively following people who like that sort of stuff, because then it will start to then show you this sort of content that's going to help you and be part of your space. So if you're trying to get into a new industry or you're trying to get into a new function of work, go and follow like loads of people in that space, and then LinkedIn will is an algorithm that you have been trained to then show you more and more of that sort of content that you can then engage with and be more relevant and become very quickly like an interacting voice in that field. I'm not saying you need to become a top voice or anything, but if you take a company that you want to join, let's take Muse, which is the company that I work at. If you go through and identify like some of the top voices in that group, or even the CEO of that company is really active, and you start commenting, you'll start to have name recognition if they're thoughtful
Mm-hmm.
comments. And then when the right job comes up, if you're able to say, "Hey, CEO, I'd love to an introduction to your recruiting team. I just saw this job." He's so much more likely to recommend you and to introduce you to me, because he already has like a kind of a gauge that you're engaging with him in thoughtful ways, and you have the right way of thinking for what he's looking for in his business, and he's more likely to go with that brand recognition and introduce you that he would have done if you had just approached him for the first time without doing any of those steps beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also, for the people concerned about it feeling like you only want something from them, you engaging with content, you constantly kind of being involved in this stuff, it is doing something for them as well. So if your concern is, oh, they see me as someone who's only kind of reaching out because they need a job, they don't when you've done the stuff that we just kind of talked about here, right? They see you as a valuable member of this community who has helped their posts do better and has helped sort of given a voice to the things that they're talking about. And there's a lot of people who probably listen to this and they cringe even as we talk about it. But we're talking about baby steps here, right? We're talking about these things that lean up. I would just say, how do you get to know people? Let's stop even overthinking it. let's just think of it as getting to know people and building a relationship with them.
Yeah.
You do it in your life all of the time.
I really like this kind of this emphasis on non-transactional interactions, because I think that is like the kind of foundational work of building networks. And one of the most, I think, comfortable ways of doing this is by reaching not to out to a hiring manager, not out to a recruiter, but to a peer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, someone who works in the same industry as you, who works in potentially the exact same job as you, and that you can just get to know because you want to share information and talk about something they're interested in. You immediately have a connection because you can talk about your work and the problems that you've been solving and stuff like that. And there's no like you just want to connect and ask for, you know, mutual exchange of information, right? So there's nothing that's necessarily in need from that, but they might know a recruiter that you might want to speak to. They might get approached to a job and send it your way in the future. It's just another seed that's out there. Or they might know a community to that point that you're not a part of that they find really valuable, and they can introduce you to that community. Like, all these little seeds and all these little webs do kind of form over time, but they require you to invest in them.
Yeah, it's the only real way to do it. And to the active job seekers, I understand that that's not a big help now, right? And so, like,
Yeah.
it's why I said what I said earlier. That's more likely to help you next time. It doesn't mean don't do it now, right? It doesn't mean stop the other stuff either, because you need that more instant stuff to try and find a job now. I get it. But this other stuff is what you continue doing constantly.
Yeah.
I think of myself now and I think of myself a few years ago. And yes, I created a ton of content and went viral a lot and built a big following, of course. But I've also built a ton of genuine connections with people during that
Yeah.
time as well. And I know that if something bad were to happen to me, I would be in such a different spot and headspace and situation I am because of the work I've been doing the last few years in that.
I couldn't agree more, and like I've had a lot of my like LinkedIn friends essentially come on this podcast, and I didn't know you like a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know Dan, and I would call Dan up, and if I had a problem in my world, I would feel really comfortable in getting on the phone to him and getting like genuine advice and like friendship and support through that moment. And he's someone that I would trust a lot, and I think and I just and it's so crazy to think that it's come from something as silly as writing content on LinkedIn, and that we built these like really kind of strong friendships with so many new people around the world. Alderson James are one of the leading people and talent agencies. Since 2013, they've been responsible for over 1,000 people and talent hires, including one in a company that I used to work at. They helped me hire my head of technology TA. So I know the guys there pretty well. They've been responsible for scaling some of the most innovative companies in the UK and the EU. Also recently just launched in the US. So even folks in your neck of the woods now, James, can get involved for contingent, retained, and executive search. And they also now do embedded through AJX. So they can do it all. Okay, I'm going to want to pivot slightly. Let's say you don't know someone, but you want to reach out to them and you want to engage with that person for one reason or another. How would you actually recommend someone going about doing that?
Yeah, I think the key to so much of this is being authentic, is being you. So, like, don't find a script or a prompt somewhere online and just copy and paste that. And I've shared, I mentioned like sending a message to Amy Miller, and I've shared that message publicly before and in newsletters and things like that. But you couldn't just copy and paste and use it; it wouldn't make sense. But I was very open, right? I was very just like, hey, I'm trying to break into this world. I'm okay at it. You're great at it. I would love to connect with you and be able to kind of stay in contact with what you're doing, and maybe chat sometime about it. And they might say yes, and they might say no. They might not take it. I have sent these messages to people who have totally ignored me. There is a very huge content creator on LinkedIn I reached out to, and he never responded. And then later I read him talking on X about how he blocked a bunch of people on LinkedIn, and I was actually one of them. So that's going to happen too. Like, you put yourself out there, those things will happen. But I mean, my advice is just be you. I am authentically me, and I'm trying to find my people when I build a network. So find people who feel like your people, because everyone won't be. It is okay, right? If you don't want it to be phony, if you don't want to feel like it's all fake, then stick to the people who feel real to you, that you would want to approach, and approach them as you would in any situation.
I think lots of people will listen to this and be like, a bit frustrated with that response
Yeah.
because it feels like when you look at job search content, it's like that that there is a right way to do something or a specific way to do something that's going to get a better result.
Hmm.
And I think the reality is what we're saying here is there isn't.
Yeah. It's just no answers to a lot of this stuff. It's just like we are people. The other line I always say when it comes to network is just like treat people like people.
Yeah,
Like the way you want to be approached is different than somebody else. And some people approach you in ways in your life that you don't like, but they do it to someone else and they do like it.
yeah,
Like we're all humans. You might send Matt a different message than you send me, just based on kind of like what you know about each other.
yeah.
Um, so just be you and find people who you feel like that resonates with.
I think something that sits behind here is this: if you have to kind of understand the other person a little bit before you actually attempt to engage with them. And if they
Hmm.
have a LinkedIn presence at all, that sort of means like actually writing something that's going to connect with them and sending like a generic message to your point that's maybe ChatGPT generated or something like that. And it is, you can still tell for sure. I think will really d- like have the opposite effect that you're looking for. Like trying to find a shortcut, it actually takes you going looking at their profile, engaging with what they're saying and writing, and then having like a connecting response to that that you're then able to write about. Like that's what's gonna stand you out and have that person respond back to you if there's someone you genuinely want to get to know.
Yeah, I mean, it's like wanting to get to know people in any other way. I don't want to compare it to dating or something weird like that, but like the idea of like you would send someone you're interested in knowing a message that kind of like makes them want to be interested in getting to know you too.
Hmm.
And I think that's really important. I mean, I get
Yeah,
so many messages. They're just like, "Hey, LinkedIn says we have 10 mutual connections. Would love to connect." I'm just like, I don't know most of my connections. Like, it doesn't even mean anything to me. The other thing I say to people in this stuff is just like, look, people won't always respond. Sometimes
yeah,
it's because they don't want to. Sometimes it's they forget. I'm notorious at not responding to messages I get. I don't mean to be that way, but like I read it and I'm like, oh, I'll write back later, and then like later doesn't happen. I'm looking at a blinking blue box in my window right now, someone I really owe a response to. And like this person's sort of like following up well, like follow up with people, try again. If they ignore you, it doesn't mean networking is not working.
yeah,
Right. You have to accept there's a lot of losses with the wins that come.
yeah,
It's putting yourself out there.
yeah. And the more authentic you can be, ultimately, I think the more reality, the more like you're going to get a response. There was like a thought that came into my head, which is I'm a quite big fan of Loom. We use it a lot in my company, but I also use it a lot in my work and like in my job teaching and coaching and stuff like that. And I did use it a lot in my job search. And actually, recording a Loom with your like saying hello to someone in the era of ChatGPT generated content is definitely going to be an authentic connection and it is going to help you stand out and it can show a bit of your personality as well. And it's just another idea of like, is it like if you want to speak to that person, they might be more likely to respond. Maybe not though. Maybe not as well. And maybe video is not their the right forum. But it's an idea of how you could separate, especially if you're like really keen to get in someone for a job search as well. I've always found that to be a good tactic because it's a human connection.
Yeah, I've seen it work well for people, and I can also tell you people who hate that because again,
Yeah,
that goes back to what we said. That just like some stuff works sometimes for people, and sometimes it doesn't.
yeah,
But yeah, it's the trying, and it's something different. Um, you know, it's one of those things that isn't going too far. It's just generally being you and trying to connect with someone that you think you have something in common with, showing them why you think you do, and hoping to get a conversation going, and also accepting that like sometimes it won't be a lot of conversation,
yeah,
right? Sometimes it's a connection. It's like, oh, cool, great, glad to be connected. And then you keep engaging with their content. You comment, maybe you send them a message now and then. Hey, saw this article. It made me think about you. I think people put too much pressure on every conversation, on every message they send, on every person they connect with. Verse thinking of it's just like, yeah, like occasionally you'll check in, and some conversations are longer than others. I hear a lot of people say, like, well, what do I do after I say that and they accept it? It's like, I don't know, like, live
talk to
your life, build your relationship with them.
yeah,
Find the next thing to talk about at some point. It
yeah.
doesn't all have
Go
to be in
towards
one
it.
day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're not trying to get to date 10 when you're only on like, hey, do you want to have a coffee?
Right.
Okay, so let's fast forward, and and you're in a point where you want to ask someone for a referral. Um, How is there like a right or wrong way to do this? How do you recommend that candidates go about doing this?
Yeah. The best thing you can do when, whether it's a recruiter, somebody at a company, whatever else, when asking for sort of like help in getting a job at that company, is do as much of the legwork up front as possible and
Yes.
put as little work as possible on the person you're asking for help. So, hey, I was on your site. I saw this page or I saw this job. Here's why I liked the job. Here's why I think I'm a fit for the job. Here's my resume. What's the best way to go about here? Should I apply online and put your name? Is there somebody you think you could connect me to?
Yeah.
What would make this the easiest way? Versus the opposite, which is like, hey, I saw your company's hiring. Can you get me hired?
I love this. I completely agree. There's, Dale Carnegie's now dated but still very important book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Like, I think really speaks to this. Like, you need to do all of this legwork, right, to help make it as easy as possible. Take away any element of friction that you can
Mm-hmm.
to giving for that person to help you. Maybe that's actually writing the entire email for the introduction, with why you're right for the role, and saying, and the entire bio of like your little bio of your career. Maybe it's saying, do you have a referral policy in your company? I'd love, that means that you could get a little bonus as well, or something like that. Like, there's lots of different avenues for this, but going kind of the next step beyond just saying, hey, could you introduce me to this job, or hey, are you hiring? Again, like, no one really does this. I even like received a referral. Was asked recently to give a referral to someone and introduce them for a job, who is a very experienced recruiter, and I was like, yeah, but I'm not going to go and write your bio for you. I'm not going to do all of this
Mm-hmm.
for you. Like, set it all up for me. Give me a tee up, and yeah, absolutely. I'd love to refer you, but I don't have the time to write a long reference for you at the moment. So you need to do some of that work for me.
Yeah, and just again, because this is the part where you are asking for help. You're asking
Yeah,
someone a favor, and I think a great analogy is sort of helping someone move, which is the favor we all hate doing the most for people, but yet do for people all the time. But imagine someone asking you to help them move, and they'd be like, "Great, can you go to U-Haul for me
yeah,
and grab the truck?" Like, no, like you're supposed to just like show up there, and they have the pizza, the beer, and the stuff ready to go,
yeah.
and you're there to help. That's asking someone for a favor doesn't mean making them do all of the work for you.
So, kind of based on this conversation and your experience, what are like the absolute no nos when it comes to networking for a job?
Absolute no nos are making it clear that you are just kind of like mass doing what you're doing to get a job, right? So some of the stuff we referenced, and I have a ton of these messages. The
Oh
hey,
yeah,
are you hiring? Would love to be connected. Do you have any jobs? Can you find me a job? Messages like that. Um, Absolute no nos are lying about a referral or a network. I have had people reach out to people who work at companies I work and just be like, hey, I just put your name down as a referral so you could get a bonus. And I've had those people like message me and be like, hey, I don't know this person, just so you know, because nobody wants to put their name on someone they don't know. And I think the other absolute no no, there's probably a lot, but one that's related to that is like, don't skip the legwork of getting to know somebody first. You, I will not give a referral for someone that I can't speak to or don't know. In some way, I don't have to have worked with you. I don't know that you're great, whatever. I have to know something I can say, like, hey, I've never worked with this person, but I really like them and they seem smart when they talk about this stuff and whatever. I get so many messages that are like a three-way message where someone I'm connected to on LinkedIn that I do not know but is a connection, and then somebody else. And that person clearly asked the connection to reach out to me. And it's like, hey, Mike, I want to introduce you to Tim. Tim's a great HR rep, and I see you're hiring one. I'll leave it from here. I'm like, I don't even know who you are, the person who messaged me about
oh,
Tim.
really?
You're like, we're just connected. And I get Tim asked you for help because he saw we were connected, but you have to put in that work. Don't try and skip it and then be surprised when it isn't working out for you.
It could harm you, that sort of stuff as well. Like getting a rogue introduction from someone who you also like might look at their profile and be like, who is this? Like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
trust this person and I know who they are. Like, depending on, there's so many variables when you don't know the person on the other side and how they're going to respond to things. In the same way that, like, not everyone likes to be communicated with in the same way or receive feedback in the same way. Not everyone will
Mm-hmm.
like to receive a referral in the same way. And if you don't know how that referral is going to land, you could actually hurt your job search chances. And so don't take a, if you don't know the person, don't take a blind referral from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't think people realize this, and it could be company size related because I have worked mostly at small companies in my career. But when I get a referral, someone comes in the system that's a referral, or I get messaged about it, whatever it is. Like my first question is sort of like, "Oh, like how do you know this person?
Yeah.
Do you work with them? Do you think they're good?" Most people don't want to recommend someone that they don't think is going to be good for a role. So there's all this advice out there of like, yeah, just ask a stranger because they'll want to get a bonus. It's so damaging for people to give a referral that winds up being really bad.
Yeah.
So just understand that like they're going to ask about you when you get referred to a company.
Almost certainly. Yeah. So when I like kind of think back of our conversation today, I think one of my kind of really big takeaways is this kind of quote that comes back from Johnny Wilkinson, who is a famous English rugby player who kicked the drop goal for England to win the World Cup back in 2003. And he famously said, "The more you practice, the luckier you get." And I think when it comes to networking, this is where that sort of really applies. Like if you keep putting in the reps and you keep putting in the investment of time and effort, then it will eventually repay you. And that's the same kind of when it comes to using your network as part of your job search, or like being or having networking strategy as part of your job search. I think ultimately it like does pay off because the more webs and that kind of that you spread and the more seeds that you plant, eventually one of those will grow into something that's going to be really fruitful, be it now, be it years in the future. And I know that I wouldn't be where I am today without the network that I've built along the way. And I think when people ask me about like how did I build this network, I don't really know. Like because it's because ultimately because the people who build it is like I just built connections and I went to
Right.
events and I responded to people and I said yes to things, and that led me to build a and I put myself out there, and that ultimately led to where I am today in so many respects. I'm really really proud of that. But I don't. It's not. It wasn't like an intentional strategy when I started. There are intentional strategies you can use, but ultimately it starts really and ends with building human connections that's authentic to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a perfect example. Just the idea of like, I have no idea. Like, it just happens over time. And like most things that take a long time to do, it's just sort of like one day you look back and realize how long it took and everything that happened. I mean, I think for myself, I have coming up like my first ever paid speaking engagement for like a group of HR professionals. And I
Amazing.
was really excited. And like, but then I like look at that. I'm like, oh, well, I sent a message to Joel, the realist recruiter, 2 years ago, and eventually we got on the phone and had a conversation, and we became friends. And he introduced me to this person who got me on this podcast, and the person on that podcast introduced me to this person organizing this event, and that all happened over a year and a half. Right? That's how that stuff happens. Networking,
Yeah.
like most of job searching, is a skill. And yes, there is luck involved in finding a job, but your quote is exactly right for it, right? But there are still people who get lucky more because they're
Yeah.
in the right position because they have a better strategy to these things.
Yeah. I think, yeah, as I said earlier, like I think a lot of people listening to this will be a bit frustrated because networking is so often pitched as the solution.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality, it's just one of the paths along the way that you hopefully will take. And I think if you take one thing away from this episode, is that regardless of where you're at in your job search, either you're active, you're not active, whatever it is, please like do something per week, per month, per quarter that is going to help strengthen that network of yours, and be intentional about it, because you never know when you're going to need that time, when you're going to need that support from that network. And as both of us have been on the other side of that and are now through it, like it's such a critical emotional and kind of fiscal support mechanism in the end that can really help with your job search.
Yeah, it's exactly that. Be patient with it. Stop looking for a solution out of it, and just treat people like people for a while, and eventually, like things can happen that are good for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe you'll get lucky, and maybe something will happen short term, and but it could take a while. Right. Well, not necessarily like the kind of the dopamine hit that lots of people kind of want to hear. But thank you so much, Mike. That was a really like important episode, I think, because it's so as we set this up, like this is such a complex topic and one that is very poorly spoken about on LinkedIn, I think. And so I think this is a really important episode for us to cover. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
For people who want to find you, where can they find you on your various different socials?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, of course, just Mike Peditto, and then Realistic Recruiting on TikTok and Instagram. And I finally uploaded my first long form YouTube video last week after 2 years of saying I was going to. So maybe by the time you hear this, there'll be more. If there's not more videos on this, I've already quit. Message me and tell me to upload another one. YouTube is hard, but you can find me on all those places as well.
YouTube is hard. I agree. And that's not a game that I played, I don't think, very well. But thank you so much. Yeah, you can get all of these tips directly into your inbox at the Open to Work Toolkit.com. We are coming to you live every Monday with free tips. We're at episode 45 now, I think. Nice. 46, which is incredible to think over a year ago when we started this, that we're here. And we're going to do a nice little run-in of special episodes up until our 50th episode. So stay tuned for that. Mike, thanks so much for coming on again. And we'll see you on the LinkedIn sphere very soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.